Good morning, AdvisorHub community. Cheryl Penny here, founder and CEO of Dynasty Financial Partners. As many of you know, Dynasty is a platform service company for some of the top independent wealth management firms across the country, providing their advisors with access to robust technology, advisor and client applications, consulting to advisors in transition, M&A guidance, capital to fuel their businesses, and a broad array of investment products and services to help advisors meet the needs of their clients while helping them to grow their business. With over 47 RIAs, several hundred advisors, and $50 billion in assets on the platform, we are thrilled to be doing our part to help power the truly independent movement. Let me quickly say congratulations to my good friend Tony Sirianni and the entire AdvisorHub team on pulling together a great virtual event for all of us this year. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you all in person at next year's AdvisorHub Annual Summit. I think we'd all agree that 2020 has thus far been quite an extraordinary year in many ways. It has brought forth many challenges for us as leaders in our businesses and community and as advisors to our clients. It has also opened many new opportunities for those of us ready to receive them and to act on them, and has caused us once again to think about so many of our everyday heroes who do so much for all of us. The combination of a health crisis with a financial crisis, combined with increased social unrest, work from home, increased market volatility, and the need to adopt new ways of doing things faster, have required us to evolve as enlightened leaders at breakneck speed. For those leaders who were proximate with their clients and employees, who listened well, who communicated clearly, and were open to learning and growing with their team, those are the leaders that have been winning disproportionately over this past year, and I believe will continue to do so going forward. This year at Dynasty, we consolidated our real estate, we installed new safety protocols in our offices, we doubled down on our Dynasty Women's Network, enhanced our diversity and inclusion focus, embraced new technology across the business. We stayed very close to our clients. We've invested more in the development of our people. We've ensured our balance sheet was strong and ready for a potential prolonged storm. And remarkably, and to the credit of our team, we've grown the business. So much of our why is, like so many of you, in that we get the profound honor of living our American dream by empowering others to live theirs. Yet, there is so much more to do. There's so much more for all of us to do. Where are we going, and what do we need to do to get there? Will it be different than what got us here? How do we lead through all of this chaos? Let me now introduce our keynote speaker, whom Dynasty is honored to sponsor, to help us think through how we can lead in such challenging times. I am thrilled to introduce a true trailblazer, Lieutenant General Nadia West, who is retired United States Army Lieutenant General and the 44th U.S. Army Surgeon General, and the former Commanding General of the U.S. Army Medical Command. General West was the first Black Army Surgeon General and was the first Black female active duty Major General, and was the first Black female active duty Major General and the first Black female Major General in Army medicine. She is also the first Army Black female Lieutenant General and is the highest ranking woman to have ever graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point. General West, who is an orphan, knows a thing or two about how adversity builds character. And as you would expect, she has remarkable experience in executive leadership, crisis management, disaster response, leading in times of uncertainty, and is the embodiment of good old-fashioned grit. Many of these things that we could all use as leaders in this very unique time. We have asked General West here today to speak to us about a broad range of topics, including leadership, team building, the importance of diversity, communication, dealing with change and uncertainty, and how we all can lead with empathy for our teams, our family, and our clients. I think we're all in for a special treat. So again, thank you all for being here this morning, and we hope you enjoyed this wonderful agenda that AdvisorHub has prepared for all of us, starting right now with Lieutenant General Nadia West. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to be sitting here with General Nadia West. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to Cheryl Penny at Dynasty for his wonderful introduction. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for those very kind words and introduction there. And it's so great being with you, Tony.
Well, it's great to be with you, and I'm glad we're doing this face to face. So this should be a lot of fun. We're local people, just Virginia and Maryland, so that's all good. There's three things I want to talk to you today. We have so little time, and the conversations we've had leading up to this have been so interesting. So, leadership in crisis. I want to talk about the pandemic. And I want to talk about some social justice stuff. So rarely would you have one person who would actually sort of be an expert in almost all of those areas. So it's this tremendous background that you've had that I really want to sort of get into. So leadership in crisis. I mean, the nation, you could say, is in a crisis right now. We have a pandemic, we have social unrest, we've got, in our business, particularly the markets upheaval, our folks are sort of right in the middle of it. We have an industry that sort of has issues with diversity and traditionally has had. So we're having a crisis. And interestingly, advisors are entrepreneurs. So they have their own businesses. They're leaders in their own communities in a way. And whether you're managing a $50 billion, RIA or a $150 million practice, there are leadership issues that we're facing now. And I know you have great experience, with that through your time in the Army. Let's face it, Lieutenant General, there's not too many of those. So if you could help us just sort of give us a sense of what we're looking at.
Yeah, so, you're absolutely right. And I think to set the tone or the context, just a really quick definition of leadership from the Army's perspective, because what you said is spot on, Tony, that, a lot of times people think that leaders are the people that are in charge. And so, the Army defines leadership as the process of providing, purpose, direction, motivation to accomplish a task and to improve the organization. But it also implies in the essence of what a leader should do, know, and be, and so that's kind of the package of it. And so if you notice, it doesn't say the person in charge. And so it's influencing. And so just like you mentioned, all the teammates and the members that you talked about, they are and either by their words, their actions. So leading during these times, leading your people, taking those principles of the do, know, and be is important. And I would say the be, because you know what you're doing. The do is motivating people, influencing, getting them to do the job. The how, I think, is the important part. And that essence of leadership is, the be of leaders, what's your character, the values, the attributes that you have to motivate your team. And that's where all the things that we talk about, empathy and inclusion, come in, is because it's kind of that sense of, how do you treat people when you lead? It's difference between like managing, you manage things and lead people, a lot of times people say. And in a crisis situation, I think the only thing that's really different is sometimes the time constraints, how everything is compressed. And so you don't have a lot of time to, do things that you normally do with your decision-making process. But if you've established in calm, tranquil times, the trust between your people, they know that you're a person of character, and they trust you, that you will tell them, you won't ask them to do the hard and unpopular things that you wouldn't do yourself, or that, you're coming from a place of, hey, this is about the mission or the organization. It's not about me. And so all those different things, and then including people, you develop your team when it's, when you have downtime. And so I think the crisis part is having those established relationships. And then in crisis times, when you don't have, especially these times when you don't have your normal ways of interfacing, you're not meeting face to face. You can't, kind of see how your people are doing, like you would during all the cues that you'd get if you were meeting them. So I think, leading during crisis is, knowing who you are as a leader, knowing your people, really taking care of your people, and having that character part so your folks can trust you.
There's one thing you said that was interesting to me, was empathy, because we're in a situation where not only do you have to have empathy for your team, but financial advisors are dealing with the general public who's very nervous in general, because they're dealing with the same issues. And other than their health, their wealth is a big part of it. It's their legacy, it's the future. So how about leaders dealing with, in a situation where they have to be empathetic? You're used to maybe making decisions and hard charging, and now you've really got to sort of listen to people. And maybe that's not what you've done your whole career.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. I mean, so a lot of times people think empathy is, like a feeling type thing and touchy-feely. And even in the Army, when a lot of people say, well, it makes sense, you're a medical person, so you guys have to have compassion. but some of our hardcore warriors talk about empathy. And Creighton Abrams said it, back in the day when he said, soldiering is an affair of the heart. I mean, that sounds really squishy, doesn't it? Not for a hardened soldier, but he says you have to care about your soldiers. You have to learn about them. And it can't be know it and your people know it if you really care about them. And when I say care, I mean, you want to know what's important to them, what they value. And you have to, in order to do that, you have to get to know them. You have to make the effort to say, okay, I have my perspective and I have my lens through which I look at things. But what is someone else's, thoughts of maybe how to do this? And use a real quick example of that movie, Remember the Titans. I don't know if you ever saw that. And again, the Coach Boone right there in Virginia. But that one scene where Coach Boone took them to Gettysburg, these guys in a room together that hated each other. And it seemed like almost a fake exercise. Okay, here's your checklist, learn about your roommate. But in doing that exercise, they actually became, and that, it's based on a true story, Partier, and I can't remember the other one, like brothers. And so I think that's one of those things you can learn. People say, can you learn empathy? I think you can cultivate empathy by having the desire to say, hey, I may not understand how this person views something, but I can find out by asking them, trying to get the information.
Well, it's interesting. There was a guy named Jim Brinkley who was, you wouldn't necessarily know him, but he's famous in this industry, at least in the regional firms. He used to say there was a platinum rule. So everybody knows the golden rule, which is treat other people how you want to be treated. But the platinum rule is treat other people how they want to be treated.
Absolutely.
And the only way to find that out is to listen. You have to know what they want. Very, very difficult to do. I'm also glad you brought up. We'll go back to it because I want to hit these things in order a little bit, but I do want to go back to some of that, getting people together and trying to understand each other, because I think that's a big part. So it is certainly part of leadership. And I do want to come back to it when we talk about some social justice stuff. One of the big things we're all concerned about right now is the pandemic. And so not only do you have experience in leadership, but I know that you worked through, something that's really scary, which is was the Ebola crisis. How do you look at sort of what's going on now based on your experience then?
Yeah, and I tell you, when I talk about those, the do, know, and be of leadership, I think the folks on the Joint Staff, and namely, Lieutenant General at the time, Dave Goldfein, who went on to be the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and then General Dempsey, who was the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, because they kind of, when I brought this issue to them early in March, about the Ebola crisis, it really hadn't really taken off. There was only a few cases. And so the fact that they listened to me, okay, I'm the medical advisor, and, General Dempsey, they're worried about national security, no joke, national security issues. ISIL was just forming then, or causing problems then, Russia and all the things they were doing in Ukraine. All those things were going on. So I come and say, hey, sir, there's a couple of cases of Ebola in Guinea. And they could have said, very nice, Nadia, go sit down and we'll talk to you later. But no, he said, okay, let's put together a multidisciplinary group. So General Dempsey took the time, precious time, to say, let me learn more about it. So we got academics together, the services, public health officials, and even some contrarians, people who said, hey, the DOD, you need to stay in your lane. This isn't something. So he just got everybody together to kind of come, with an inclusive environment so he could learn more. So he had humility, which a leader needs, to know that you don't have all the answers. And so I think, and then what were our strengths and weaknesses? How could we leverage, stuff, the military might, to handle a humanitarian crisis? And so that was kind of what we bannered about. What can we bring to the table that would be effective and efficient? We can do command and control very well. So they sent the 101st Airborne Division C2 element, command and control element, to serve, not to be a war element, but to kind of, okay, let's help with surveillance. Let's help with organizing the equipment coming in, and kind of, any of the things that are going to be doing that. So we leveraged, and we have a great logistical and supply chain management. So I think it's one of those things. So learning that lesson, first, a leader who's willing to listen, because it could have easily said, hey, I don't have time for that. And it would have been absolutely right. He says, hey, that's State Department, that's HHS, that's somebody else. They'll call us if they need us. But he really invested the time. And I think that helped us have an effective approach, because we weren't kind of throw something together at the last minute when things were really flying in the air. And and I think that's kind of, when you say what can you learn from that, I think having a multidisciplinary approach, and then one voice. So when the president said, hey, USAID has lead, so DOD participated, but we knew who was in charge and we were in support of. And so we knew USAID, whatever they said, and we helped, of course, here's what we have that we can bring. But there was a clear line of that. So it wasn't, okay, I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge. And that, I think, helped, have a more organized way of approaching things.
How would you compare that with today and the response today to what's going on with the, COVID?
Yeah, well, first there's several differences. So with Ebola, we were dealing with a disease that has a fairly well understood, course. So you know the symptoms, the incubation period, that people that are symptomatic can spread, and afterwards how long. So it was kind of a known entity. So the difference is this is evolving. So the information about the coronavirus has been evolving, and so that's different. So you have to keep changing your recommendations, and that can lead to people saying, well, do you guys know what you're talking about or not? Well, we do, but we have to give you new information when it changes. And then dealing with the U.S., where you have governors of states who, by their authorities have their own sovereign areas that they're responsible for. And so, they can make recommendations or decisions, independently, what they think is the good of their citizens and constituents. And so that also adds a layer of complexity, where you've got, the multiple different areas within the border of the United States. And then again, of like who's in charge, who's the authoritative information stream. Like for us, when we were doing Ebola, the CDC, working with the World Health, they were the definitive public health authorities on, here's the recommendation. Here's the incubation period. Okay, here's the situation where you would quarantine. And so I think having one authoritative public health voice, the expert, where all the information is, flows through, especially in this environment when it's evolving. If you have too many people saying, okay, here's what it is, here's
right.
what,
it's confusing.
It's confusing. So I think that's the difference here. And then, people, and just the willingness of our citizens to understand that it's not necessarily about their own personal safety, it's about the safety of others. So, that's kind of a different thing. In the military, we learn responsibility for our battle buddy. And sometimes it's hard for folks to say, hey, but, I'm not sick, I feel okay. But, it's not about just us personally, individually. It's about how do we keep the entire, population health is about populations, not just the individual. And so that's another layer.
That being said, how do you see this playing out? Are we going to get a vaccine? How would we get back to normal? If you were in charge, how would you want this to play out and make it play out?
Well, I think what's very encouraging is the speed with which we are getting, vaccines. Usually, as you know, in history, it takes decades sometimes to develop that. So the fact that we are slightly down the road is encouraging. And what is also encouraging is the transparency. So I think some people were dismayed and concerned about when the studies, were halted, for certain reasons. That's actually a good thing. That means that there's due diligence in making sure that, and that's kind of what you do with trials. Trials, you work the kinks out. And so if they stop because they found something that happened, then that's how you, improve, the countermeasure. And so I'm confident that we will, relatively, soon, and again, it's all relative, but I think it's not decades or years. It's, within, weeks or months, I think, of having that. Now, the other thing is once they get it, will people take it? And we can't get people to get their flu shots, and we now, in some instances, we can't get parents to see the importance of getting their kids their childhood vaccine. So I think that's going to be the second issue of getting people to trust the vaccine. And, kind of like we talked about with leadership, if you are a trustworthy organization in calm times, people are willing to roll their sleeve up in regular times. And they found that in countries where, if there's not trust in the government, then they don't trust when they're given information to say, oh, take this vaccine, it's good for you. You know,
the hope is, and you and I talked about this a little bit, that there's a level of acceptance. So one of the things that maybe this pandemic has done it makes people reevaluate, you know. And so prior to this, immunizations and the flu was somebody else's problem. You saw it as far away. Well, now it's impacting everybody. I mean, people are working at home. They have their kids at home, you know, having to be schooled. So they recognize that this is a serious issue. So hopefully that'll translate into actually, you know, doing the right thing for their health and getting the vaccine, or for everybody's health.
Yeah, and I really like that that article that you sent me about how 3-year-old will change business forever, because, you know, just like you mentioned, you know, things that people are kind of, I won't say resistant to, but it's like, you know, when something pushes them to hey, like you said, I want to see my grandkids, you know, if you're you know, you'll find a reason to use a technology or something like that. And I think, you know, people start to see that. I mean, because the people who knew about polio are, you know, they're not a lot of people around. I mean, you know, that age, but that was a serious condition. A lot of people may not have died, they did, but the consequences, the paralysis, all those different things, you know, deafness and certain other childhood illnesses, blindness, you know, neurological symptoms. So since we don't see them, the sense of urgency to maintain your vaccines has gone away. The diseases haven't gone away. They've just been put at bay at people who have an immune system to fight them. And so I think hopefully there will be a resurgence of seeing, okay, yeah, that's why it's important.
So on that same line, you know, things that you think from a medical standpoint that are, I mean, this has been sort of a cluster, whatever, at this point, but going forward, what positive things will we take out of it? You and I talked a little bit about doing, you know, Zoom doctor visits and things that, you know, this may provide a way for, you know, a lot of people to access healthcare. I mean, and it was not, we could do it before, but we didn't accept it. And now we do.
Right. And I think that's one where, you know, the military, we started early on doing virtual health just because by the way that we are, you know, we are configured and where we have it deployed throughout the world, we couldn't put specialists everywhere. So we had to rely on virtual health and behavioral health. I think we talked about that. That's a huge one. When there was a mandate to screen all the soldiers returning from deployments, you know, just think of the numbers, you know, when at the height of it. So we relied on behavioral health, and our younger soldiers really liked it. And now, you know, I think there's an acceleration of the acceptance of it because, you know, there are things that you have to worry about because, you know, licensing, if you're licensed, like for me in the military, I was licensed in the state of Virginia, but I could anywhere in a federal facility, you know, I was in you know, Colorado, in Georgia, in North Carolina, as long as I've practiced on the federal installation, my license was good. Now, if I saw civilian patients downtown, I would have to get this local state license. So the same thing with virtual. So all of these things that are current, I won't say impediments because they're there for a reason, but that are, that are not, you know, that would be a block or a challenge, an obstacle. Because if you're in Virginia and I'm in Maryland, if I were, you know, to want to treat you, if I was in a civilian sector, I would have to be licensed in the state that you are or I am. And so there's so many of that. So I think it gives us the chance to accelerate looking at some of these issues that may be barriers to having, you know, interchanges all throughout. So absolutely.
It gives more people access to healthcare because you can see more people on a regular basis, you know, and again, with this pandemic, I don't know, like that article, I don't know that I want to drag myself to a doctor's office for a small thing, or if I know I have pink eye or something, you know, I could take a look at this, doc. What do you think? You know, it's just easier.
It is. Yeah, it is. And the technology now is one, like I mentioned, there's something called a peritonsillar abscess, which is it's a medical emergency. It's like I won't get gross on there, but, you know, so we had some operators that were way out in an area that if they had to evacuate the person back, the mission would be over. So they actually had a scope and, you know, sent it back to an otolaryngologist at Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas. And she was able to look at it through a scope, and there was a 18 Delta, which are special forces medics that are highly trained, and she could talk them through, hey, you know, make an incision here to drain the abscess. And, and that's like thousands of miles away rather than, okay, call medevac, bring them out. And so you're absolutely right. That's something where now there's times when you definitely have to put hands on people, and the therapeutic relationship will never be completely, face to face. Well, it may, hundreds of years from now, but there's something about the human touch still that's important for human beings. But I think for the things like you mentioned, just think of, not having to wait in line in a parking lot, or look, if there's a parking lot that's full, or wait in a line at a pharmacy or things like that, because of the way to do that. And people are more accepting.
It's so much like our business where we do so much on Zoom now, and it was just not the way. It always had to be in person with handshakes and signing papers, and now we do it all, on Zoom. And I think the big thing is the access too for people. So just to just put it in a 50-50, you're optimistic we're going to get through this pandemic and back to normal. I don't want to put you on the spot with a timeline, but
I think we are. I do. I just read Barry's book on the Great Influenza. Phenomenal book. He wrote it like I think 2000, a while back, but it was he redid the foreword of it, 2018, I think. And it's unbelievable. If you look back of what we were going through in the pandemic, then a lot of similar issues. Misinformation. It was during the war, so there was suppression of bad news because they didn't want to worry soldiers getting on boats going over or let the enemy know that we were in trouble. So there was a whole, a lot that we learned. And I think you had those that were innovating to find out what the disease was, to isolate it, even though with the primitive stuff that they had back in 1918. But we have an ingenuity about us. I think that if we come together as as I know we can, I think that will help excel. We can get through anything. I mean, after September 11th, after all these things, we show our ability to do that. And I'm optimistic that we've got great scientists working on a cure or on a vaccine. We know more about it. If people can practice those, what we know. I mean, washing hands, managing your secretions, just some of those things that are so basic.
If we're wearing masks, our clients are wearing masks, we're keeping our hands clean. You think we're eliminating 90% of the issues?
I would say so. I mean, on CDC, they would publish these different things, and there was one early on that there were 2 workers in a beauty salon that wore their masks. They saw between the 2 of them, I think 130 something, patrons. None of them got COVID. They both were positive, had it to their families because they didn't wear masks at home. But that just showed they didn't spread it in that manner. So I think, it sounds very basic, but in the infectious disease world, it's just simple hand washing can do a lot, and definitely managing secretions, not sneezing or coughing into the air. That's why, the campaign of teaching kids to cough it to their elbow started several years ago, just for, colds, flu, and other types of things. And it can still help with that. Not 100%, but way up there, than just spewing your stuff into the atmosphere and, not to be gross, but
no, it's okay. We got to do it. Well, that's a positive, piece of news. I think, again, part of this with accessibility, and as the country changes, this whole pandemic, I think one of the themes of this conference is going to show how the pandemic has accelerated change. It's accelerated things that we wouldn't have done before, like this thing with a doctor-patient on a Zoom. It's certainly accelerated change in our business in terms of how we actually do things, from signing documents online and doing things that were, just working from home, which we never did before. A woman working at home with the kids crawling all over and the dogs barking, that's accepted today. So it has accelerated change in a way that's been interesting. One of the areas where we need to change is diversity and inclusion. So this has also been accelerated throughout the pandemic. People are home, they're watching stuff, and it's interesting. We talked about this. I'd like to get your point of view. You know something about our business, but certainly a lot about diversity and inclusion. And in my mind, it's sort of, I want to get as many people in the tent as we can to have the conversation, not make people feel excluded because they don't understand maybe politically correct something, but to try to get everybody, in there.
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. And again, in your article, you talked about that with the reckoning on race and gender. It's just the access, and then at the level, because like you mentioned, people who rush to, for a solution, and then well-meaning people. So it's not people that are just, okay, let me check a block. They really want to, okay, let's do something. But they want to grab people in at a level that, but it doesn't fix the pipeline. And like you mentioned, if there's a requirement to bring in a certain level of amount of a client, and you don't have access to those things that you can do, you're never going to work your way through the system to get there. And so if you don't do something at the pipeline part, then it's going to be difficult. And kind of like, the corollary to that is the disparities in healthcare. People say, okay, we need to put more healthcare. But if you look, why are certain groups more susceptible? Because they have poor health. Why do they have poor health? Well, because there's no healthcare in their area, why are they in that area? Well, because redlining prevented them from living anywhere else, even if they had the ability. Okay, why are they unhealthy? Well, if they don't eat proper foods, why don't they do it? There are no grocery stores in their area. I mean, so there's so many layers that if you try to just insert into the, at the end, it doesn't fix the stuff that kind of is, that got there.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, the inclusion part is, so diversity and inclusion, we use those words, but I've been in organizations and units where, yes, it was diverse, but I didn't necessarily feel included. And I've been in organizations where that's why was in the Army as long as I was, because I felt like I was a member of the team, that I belonged. I wasn't the female doc. I wasn't the Black female doc. I was their doc. When I was with 1st Armored Division, great unit, we were called the Iron Soldiers. I was Iron Doc. I was the doc for the division, and they treated me like, the doc for the division. And I think I was the first Black, the first female, but you never would have known it because I never said it, because I was just division surgeon and I loved it. And so that's where and that took the leader to do that. So I was selected by General Ellis, and he left, and General Casey took over as he was the chief of staff of the Army a while back, but he was a 2-star. And, I was his doc. He didn't say, oh, okay, I inherited her, I don't know anything about her. The fact that I was their doc is, well, you must be qualified because you're here. I didn't have to prove myself. And he made a point, I'll never forget, real quick story. Back in this was in the late 90s, when we weren't really talking about this. There was we had Iron Soldiers magazine, and so it was a brand new prototype, glossy. And so the public affairs officer, PAO, said, hey, sir, here's the prototype. And he handed it out to the whole staff. So we sat there, everyone was oohing and ahhing over the shiny pictures of the tanks and the howitzers. And so the first thing General Casey said, he looked at it and he goes, what's wrong with this? And everyone was, oh, it looks good. Was there a typo? He said, it's too white. And the PAO happened to be Black, right, at the time. And he said, it's too white. You got, he goes, I can tell you and he knew the percentage of African Americans, the percentage of women, the percentage of Latino in his unit back then. And he didn't have a card. He knew it from the top of his head. He goes, people need to see themselves. And you don't have to hire actors. We have Iron Soldiers out there that are doing it. Go find them. And if he hadn't said anything, no one would have thought anything. I didn't think anything. I thought it was a beautiful magazine. I wasn't even considering that. But he knew, if I want a cohesive team, everybody has to see themselves and everyone's included. And like I said, if he didn't say a word, no one would have known any difference. So that's the part of being an inclusion, having a leader who makes the effort. He doesn't just let it happen. He makes it happen. And not, like I said, he didn't want to say, go out and hire some Black people and put 1st Armored Division patches on them. We had them in their division. We had women just go out there and go to their spaces and take pictures of them doing their job. And so that's kind of just a quick vignette on how you really, and when I say force it wasn't like in a icky way. It was just like, hey, open the aperture a little bit wider to see who we have out there.
No, it's not even that. These are people that are already there. They're already our brothers in arms, and sisters in arms, right? So that doesn't sound any way, threatening or bad to anybody, because you want to. The one thing about a battlefield, our business is a little bit different, but it is a meritocracy. It's supposed to be. So in other words, it's an 80% failure rate. It's very difficult to do. So everybody who comes through it, we all feel like we've been through a war together, and not really, but we do feel that way. But you can't have a meritocracy unless you have a level playing field and really have it be fair. Then it's not really a meritocracy until you can do that. And that's kind of where we are. We're trying to figure out how to get that field level because we know we need to bring in more people into our programs, because our business is aging. We're not getting enough young people in, and this is part of the issue.
Right. Yeah. People need to see themselves to feel like they belong to the team. And otherwise they feel that they're kind of out. We'll allow you to play, but you're not really, you're kind of like an extra that we'll bring in. And if people feel like that, they know it. And so it's hard to feel like, and that's why, being a soldier to me was just so awesome, because, and of course, pockets of people that, didn't want women in the military. I mean, you have the whole range, but 90% of folks, it was just an awesome experience, because most of the time I was just a soldier wearing the same uniform that everybody else was wearing, in the Army, and that was just a great feeling.
So I read last night and I listened to Dr. King's letter, Birmingham jail. It's very moving, obviously, and but the thing that I took away that struck me the most about it was what he was most frustrated with. He was frustrated with good people. He can handle the bad people. I mean, you come at me with a baseball bat or a dog trying to bite me. I get that. That's courage. That just takes a little courage. But he was so disappointed. I felt, heartsick about the good people who understood what they were talking about, on level wanted the same things, but ignored it or didn't help, or just, let that happen over there. You guys are nice people, but that seemed to be, we point to that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one where you can't be, passively just letting things happen and saying, okay, well, wait. Like, that's the other thing is, okay, wait. And it's easy for the person who's, it's easy to say, okay, if you're standing out in the cold, with no jacket, and the person's in a warm house, and, it's like, I'm not cold. Just, you just hang on for a minute, it'll warm up eventually. And it's like, yeah, so you have a different perspective, but the person who's waiting is like, got it. And so I think that was really an important piece of, and the fact that he was talking to the clergymen who were telling him to wait, who were supposed to be the ones that have, a higher moral, morality to them. But yeah, it has to be, it has to be. It was funny. I was listening to a podcast the other day. Literally, I was looking up the the movie Invictus. Because I was writing something, and I was trying to find the captain of the team, Francois Pignard, and it was like October of 2020, and there was a one that he talked about how growing up, that's just all he heard. He just said, hey, if this guy ever gets out of jail, he's a bad man, he's a terrorist. Talking about Nelson Mandela. So that's what he grew up with, because, I never questioned it. I never, he grew up in South Africa. He had a different life than the people who, most of the people who lived there. And it was just one of those things where, looking back, maybe he didn't personally do anything bad to someone else, but he just lived in an environment where didn't really have, quote, empathy for those around him and what their experience was. And so, and just that whole story, as of how Nelson Mandela tried to bring everybody together. Because when you had your own people, the South Africans, the Black South Africans, cheered for the opposite team when the South African rugby team was playing, because they know that they didn't represent them, right? And so for him to bring folks together like that, it takes that around and wait. You have to take action. Both sides have to be willing to do that.
Well, and that brings us, right back around to leadership, right? That's what leadership is all about, and the empathy. This has been really great to be with you today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us at this conference, and look forward to doing this again at some point.
No, my pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation, and hope you stay safe and well there, Tony. I see our but this is all part of this is all part of doing this stuff live. Our stuff keeps going in and out, but look, I guess that leaves us with the final question for everybody is, where are all the good men dead? In the heart or in the head? We will have to figure that out for ourselves. So good to see you, Nadia, and we'll do it again. Thank you. Thanks so much. That's great.